we just generally ask that, like, is it a leftist film? That's not like makes it good or bad. Just like we're just taking the temperature of the film.
Is it an explicitly leftist film? This is explicitly leftist podcast.
It's a question we're going to ask.
There is no left Hollywood. There's liberal Hollywood, and the right likes to conflate these things.
What a glorious time.
You mean peak COVID?
All right, well, when you put it that way.
What a glorious, lots of free time to watch movies and record time, for sure. We're already up to speed. We know what's going on here. We're just waiting for him to get in there and strangle him with his dick again. So let's get to that scene.
Let's do this.
I don't know what his politics were at this point. I mean, I know he sort of gets all Maoisty when everybody gets Maoisty, but I mean, who didn't?
Okay. Oh, the 58 coup. Okay,
yeah.
Sorry. That's not CIA.
This is a werewolf episode, God damn it.
Just not the one you were hoping for.
Yeah, and when that happens, when the werewolf comes out, you're like, God damn, all right, this movie's awesome.
Victor Ostrovsky, the screenwriter on that, former Mossad agent.
Oh, wow.
Not sure what needs to be unpacked there, but...
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of fuckery here. How many people have you tortured?
Well, that doesn't really change how fucked the system is. We don't have time for baby steps right now.
Because when I watch a Godard movie, I kind of like, this is very smart. I'm very impressed with your form. I want to slap you. You feel so fucking smug.
Well, do you think this is a leftist film?
No, not at all. We're going to have to atone for this movie.
Lead a open rebellion, then the camp gets napalmed, and then revolution, I guess? Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff.
Welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe films are never neutral. There is a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, and in every time period. And we are on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller, covering one of the most significant political films of the year, Alex Garland's Civil War from, well, this year, 2024.
Yeah, we got waylaid in recording this because a civil war broke out as the reaction to this film divided a country, caused violence all over the place at theaters that were shown. No, like it's
so many critics died.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the loss of voices of a generation of film critics trying to cover this film as they turned into war photographers and reporters within our own borders. I don't know, the coverage of this movie critically, I don't know, we're in a different like film critic landscape, I guess, but it was kind of hearkening back in my mind to our first episode, Children of Men, and how just the press in general, but also the film critics that are out there handle, I hesitate to use the word deeply political films because we'll talk about this film at length here in this episode, but what did should we start with that? What was your impression of like how this was covered as it came out?
So, this is a film about war journalists working for Reuters during a civil war in the United States. We'll get into a little more of the scenario or what we can tell about it. It seemed pretty divisive, right? I didn't follow it as closely as I should have. It seemed divisive, but I mean, there was a hefty contingent saying this film functionally isn't, this is light stuff, right? Like that is not actually dealing with what it should be dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not really handling the subject of really actually delving into what it means, what the subject actually means,
Yeah.
And then, there's people who are really impressed by the technicals of it.
I mean, I'm in that camp.
And I am too. So
yeah.
Part of that sort of overwhelmed the weakness, the other elements of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it wasn't badly reviewed. It just wasn't, it was sort of mixed reviews, but I think a lot of people liked it.
I was just checking. Yeah. I mean, because obviously, in this world, the critical consensus go-to is Rotten Tomatoes. 81%, it looks like.
Yeah, not bad.
Metacritic, which I tend to look at a little bit more so than Rotten Tomatoes, is like 75 out of 100. And I mean, I would say up front too, like I like enough of the movie. I will, go back and revisit it a few times. It works decently enough on categories for me, but as we have some notes which we will get into. But yeah, no, I wouldn't say like it's a bad movie. It maybe doesn't explore things with the depth that I would like it to. But as we'll discuss here, like, is that the film's fault or is that like an audience perception kind of fault?
I think it's kind of a mess, but we'll get into that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, I can't say it's bad per se. I think it's an interesting failure
Okay, that's a that's a good way to put it.
because I don't think it actually succeeds in doing
What it's
thematically.
yeah. Yeah, that's true. But I maybe I would hesitate on the word failure just because like I think technically like it's very well made, and as we'll get into it, like there's some set piece scenes that was like, wow, that was fantastic. Just it need a little more around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of to what end with a
Yeah.
lot of these.
So I guess it's a brand new movie. It's kind of in the film zeitgeist, as it were, right now. It's out available for streaming purchase, physical media purchases as well. So if you haven't seen it, we're going to be talking about it. It's going to be spoiled for you. I don't know that this is necessarily like a twist ending kind of spoiler movie, but just so you know, as always, the way we kind of approach it here, spoilers abound. So if you want to go into it as, I don't know, blind as possible, go watch it before listening to this episode. But if you were somehow unaware of Alex Garland's Civil War, it's set in the near future. A group of war journalists attempt to survive while reporting the truth as the United States stands on the brink of a civil war. That's also, again, I feel like one of our hallmarks on the show was critiquing the shitty synopsis of films that are out there. Like in the movie itself, like the Civil War is happening. This is not a brink of civil war. I don't know why they worded it that way in the synopsis, but
19 states have seceded.
The United States Army ramps up activity.
The White House issued warnings to the Western forces as well as the Florida Alliance.
The three-term president assures the uprising will be dealt with swiftly.
Let me know if you want to try anything on.
Are you guys aware there's like a pretty huge civil war going on all across America?
We just try to stay out. With what we see on the news, seems like it's for the best.
Citizens of America.
The so-called Western forces of Texas and California
Have suffered a very great defeat at the hands of the United States military.
Mr. President, do you regret the use of airstrikes against American citizens?
We're moving to D.C. today.
We need to go down there.
They shoot journalists on sight in the Capitol. Every instinct in me says this is death.
Bloody.
Every time I survived the war zone, I thought I was sending a warning home. Don't do this. But here we are.
There's some kind of misunderstanding here. Look, we're American, okay?
Okay. What kind of American are you?
so objectively, that is a great trailer. It was a well packaged, well sold film. And I was super hyped for it. It's, A24 seemed like, taking a big swing at, I don't know, like maybe a little bit larger budget than I associate with A24. I think it was like $50-60 million for this one.
Well, it's their big budget. It's their big budget gambit,
Yeah. And, I guess this would be the time. One of the things I wanted to kind of talk through and address would be the idea of audience expectation. Because there's plenty of times when you see a great trailer, like who should we pick on here? Like Michael Bay films. Like you can make a pretty slick 2-minute trailer out of a 2.5 hour like obscene, Transformers Michael Bay movie, and you're like, oh, I don't need to see the movie, but like that's a solid trailer. Like there's an art to putting together the trailer to get you hyped up for something, to get you interested. But does the film deliver on what the trailer is promising? Doesn't necessarily make the film bad if the answer is no. Does that make sense?
I get what you're saying.
Like the hype versus reality and the excitement going in.
I don't think that's the issue here. I don't think that's the issue. I think so you have this scenario, to briefly summarize, in which for an undisclosed amount of time, the United States has broken up into at least 4 regions, multiple secessionist forces, but the biggest one being, so there's the Florida Alliance and then Texas and California, the Western forces or whatever.
Well, just real quick, like the map that A24 like put out as in its press materials for this film. It has those. So the Florida Alliance, the Western Forces, it has the Loyalist states kind of through the center of America, and then up north, like west of Wisconsin over to Washington is the New People's Army.
Right. I think that's your Portland Maoists.
Yeah.
Which get referenced but not explained at all.
Not at all. Well, so the hype leading into the movie, I think, also overlaid with the political landscape we've got here in the United States in 2024.
That's the thing, is you're making this movie now for a reason. This is all based off of scenarios. It is supposed to deal with the nature of our deeply unstable political moment. We're doing this, there's been 3 elections in which the right has been put down globally or taken some hits. But in the context in which the far right, oftentimes fascistic right, has been on the march. So Britain, where the Tories were sort of crushed, but that's sort of complicated and doesn't totally fit. France, where in the parliamentary elections, the left ended up doing a lot better and was able to hold off the National Front. And then if you go back a little bit, in India, the BJP, so the Hindu nationalists, who remained in power but had to go into coalition, they got a minority of the vote, which is sort of historic. They never had to do that before. But the point is that, we're in but then, if you look at the United States, we're on an absolute razor edge. And so in many ways, the premise here feels very, it's absolutely real. So if you're doing that, you're walking right into this and you have to actually deal with it.
Right.
I really don't think this is an expectations problem.
Well, then in a way it is, because the expectations are, this is what you're positioning this to be. And then you watch it and you're like, well, that's not it.
Yeah. But
to a large degree.
I think, we have a situation. Sometimes you have a situation where the issue is that this movie is actually not what you expected it to be, but you should just watch it for what it is. And sometimes it's that it's just kind of confused, and the filmmaker doesn't really have the stuff to get across what they think they're getting at. And I think that's what this is.
Honestly, I think too, which we have some clips we'll play here throughout the episode, it kind of seems like Alex Garland thought he was.
Yeah, I think he thought he was.
With his issues, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Because there's little hints at what he's trying to get at, but it's not enough.
Right.
So, basically, this movie is set in an indeterminate but near future, in which the United States has fallen into civil war. The main factions being Texas and California, which a lot of people are like, Texas and California would never work together, blah, 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 but we can talk about that. The Florida Alliance, which seems sort of like the Deep South. What's hinted at as some sort of Midwestern Maoist breakoff, which is an interesting choice.
Well, it mentions the Portland Maoists, so more like Northwest.
Maybe Northwest.
Kind of yeah.
Well, the New People's Army sounds very Maoist in flavor.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I guess on the map, the A24 posted, it does stretch, like Wisconsin out to Seattle. So all those northern states west of Michigan, basically. That's an interesting collection, too.
Super interesting.
How would you have Portland Maoists and then fucking Christy Gnome's area of what?
Yeah, no, it's really wild. So, but basically, we follow a bunch of journalists working for Reuters, leaving New York and trying to cover the final days of the war by interviewing the president before he's murdered by the Western forces. And so they have to travel through the sort of broken landscape of Civil War America. And, on the surface, this seems really great. But as we'll talk about, it's a little more complicated.
Yeah, yeah. Again, my interest is piqued. That sounds interesting. I'm a sucker for kind of dystopian society falls apart movies, plenty of which we've covered here. Shout out George Romero. And also, I'm a sucker for journalism movies. So I was pretty hyped. I'm always curious whether or not it's going to fall victim to expectation and hype when it just isn't that movie. I want to meet a movie on its terms. Usually that's happens to me when I read the book first and then I see a movie. That first viewing, I'm my brain will only wrestle with is it true to the book? What did they change? That sort of stuff. Kind of unfair. It's its own movie. Let it be its own movie. So I kind of have to get one viewing almost out of the way. this one had like expectations, and there was so much talk in political and film circles about like what this movie was when no one had seen it yet. Like as soon as it debuted, I think it was like South by Southwest. So I was kind of curious what if it was a touch a victim of kind of a hype machine. But like you're saying, as you're watching it, you're like, it mentions this, and then it's almost like Alex Garland thought mentioning something, or we've already referenced like there's a line in the movie about like the Portland Maoists or an Antifa massacre that you're like, well, that's interesting. Just because you're mentioning something doesn't mean it's being explored. Like, give me some. You've got journalists riding around in cars in good chunks of this movie. I would assume they'd be talking about the world around them that they live in that they're covering, and maybe get a little nuance and character dynamics to explore some of these things. Mentioning it in dialogue is not the same as like exploring it.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. It's the difference between seeing a headline on social media versus reading the whole article. And I don't know. I feel like Garland kind of, it's not even that it's convoluted. It's more like all this stuff is dangled out where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. And then there's nothing done with those interesting things. So like, it's almost like what it could have been and almost is. And that makes it more frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, you're supposed to get a vague sense of what's going on from what people say. And, you know, there's hints of a Trumpian thing, or very strong hints of a Trumpian sort of scenario. You know, the president has a third term. He disbanded the FBI. Yada, yada. You know, this is very familiar stuff from our current political context.
Yeah, mentions like bombing American civilian, like
but nothing is done with this, really. Like, we don't get anything about it. So what ends up happening is it's a movie about war journalism in which you bizarrely decided to do this sort of scenario, you know, this sort of future scenario to talk about war journalism. And we should talk about the arcs of the different characters and who they are. But I think the general feeling is that doesn't really work, right? Like, these are almost two different. It feels like these are almost two different things, because the war journalism could be used to elucidate the of the conflict itself and the politics of that, but it's not really used for that. It's supposed to be sort of its own thing, and that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into that.
Well, that's a good spot right now. So we have a 4-person journalism crew heading to DC to interview the president, which that in itself, that type of like, because they're choosing these assignments too, it seems like, right, within the context of the movie. They're not like Reuters assigned them to go cover something. You have like a war photojournalist. You do have a Reuters journalist who says, you know, he is and is her colleague. They're choosing to go interview a third-term president who's bombing American citizens and killing people, like, you know what I mean? Like in the middle of a civil war.
Who the reason there aren't journalists in DC is that they're shot on sight as enemy combatants.
Right. So there's something there. They're going to head in to try to get this interview. That almost feels like, to me, in hindsight, like it's a plot device to kick off their road movie. Right. As they tour through, you know, this Civil War embattled, you know, America here. I mean, fine. It's a plot device. I'm fine with that. So you have Kirsten Dunst as Lee Smith. She's, you know, round photojournalist. You have Wagner Mora as Joel. He's a Reuters writer and journalist. He's Kirsten Dunst's colleague. They've been covering. They've been journalism buddies for quite a while now. They've got a great rapport going. Then you have Kaylee Spaney, who plays Jesse Collins. She's like the young aspiring photojournalist. And then you have the fantastic Stephen McKinley Henderson as Sammy, the veteran journalist. So you couldn't have more of a perfect cross section of perspectives in a car heading off on this like journalistic mission. You know what I mean? Like, and that dynamic is really never fully utilized, I don't feel.
I mean, I think there's a lot of scenes where they deal with the dynamic between all these characters pretty well. But the problem is that well, all right, I think it goes off the rails later on, and we can talk about that.
That might be the way. Like, it's set up very well, I think, and pretty skillfully.
I think it's set up skillfully and then goes off the rails.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have these different perspectives, but
well, do you want to mention kind of like the arcs to these then? Because obviously then there's journalistic tropes when you have this kind of a combination of 4 characters together. You have like the wet behind the ears or whatever that phrase is, like young journalist who's like seen some of this shit for the first time. And then you have, obviously she idolizes Lee Smith, the Kirsten Dunst character. And then, it's like first real assignment. So I kind of feel like that might be the audience character, so to speak, because that's taking us through the story.
I mean, she's sort of the audience character, but it's not really totally set up that way. I mean, so part of it is she's looking up to Kirsten Dunst's character. Kirsten Dunst's character is PTSD'd out of real bad.
Yeah.
And part of it is we see why, because we see images. She's been a war reporter for a long time. She's seen horrifying things all over the world. And there's a point where she says, every time I sent these back, it was like a message for us not to do this, not to have a civil war. And look, this is where we are now.
Right.
Which is like a thematic about the failure of the power of journalism, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right. No, I mean, it's there. It's there. It just needs a little bit more. It just needs more. Like, yes, we see that. And then also but at the same time, these journalists are still doing a job. And at the same time, they're also adrenaline junkies being driven by the danger and the need to get the story in a cynical way. What is it? What do you want? You could do all these things, but you're not. So choose one. Sorry. All right. Character arcs.
No. You're totally right there. So the newbie, by the time we get to the end, has like seen some shit. She got some guidance. It's that, she went to school for photojournalism in the field versus, in the classroom, I guess. But she also shows some tricks about how like she can develop her own film, like mobily. So she doesn't have to go to there's a character arc to that one. Kirsten Dunst I think she has a fantastic performance here, but I think the script allows her character to kind of fall apart or fall into like tropes that I just cannot stand and we don't need in this movie by the finale. And I think that kind of undermines the quality of performance she's doing here with this like trope of like, has to save the newbie, pushes her out of the way of some gunfire, then just sort of stands still and takes it when that didn't need to happen at all. It's a very powerful ending sequence, which we can mention more later, but character arc wise, that one, it just seemed like it robbed that character of like it robbed an interesting character of like.
Well, it robs her and Jesse, the wet behind the ears reporter. It robs them both of an arc that feels emotionally true. It feels like they become cartoons at the end there in a different type of movie. If you didn't make this such a grounded, realistic movie, maybe you could pull that off, but that's not the imagery we're getting.
And if you're going to kill off like the teacher veteran character that is Kirsten Dunst's character, you're in the middle of a war zone. You can do that in a really, like you said, grounded, realistic way. Just like, a quick shot and she, the newbie looks behind and like, oh, she's laying there dead. Like it doesn't need to be this kind of operatic, I don't know, semi-climax to the movie.
Well, but there's this poetry to being, I mean, basically what's happened is that the newbie Jesse has gotten beyond her fears in a certain sense, but it's caused her to be manic and take incredible risks. And they're following the soldiers as they fight their way through the White House and, killing Secret Service people. Basically, Kirsten Dunst's character, Lee, had just been through a PTSD period in which she was sort of like unable to function. But she's
she froze, right outside the White House there.
She freezes in front of the White House. The other journalists are leaving her behind. She pulls it together. It's her instincts that says go into the White House because everybody's looking for the president, but they've gotten suckered. Like they sent out his car and he wasn't in it. And so there's this moment where she jumps in the way of Jesse getting in the way of gunfire to get a shot.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with it is that it's really stupid.
Right.
Because Jesse is acting so reckless to the point of just like absolute stupidity. And that it's like, we get it. She's on adrenaline high. She's freaked out. She's just doing these things. And Kirsten Dunst's character is doing a split second, go for it. Right.
Yeah.
But I don't actually believe this character we're watching, even if they were, that would be doing it quite that stupidly. The problem is that it's so obvious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then Kirsten Dunst's character dies, and they go ahead and they, do an interview with the president, and he gets shot. The president.
It's really an interview, but yeah,
it's not really an interview.
I mean, they get the shot in terms of they shoot the president, but they also get the shot in terms of war journalism.
Right. And then, there's this cynicism to it, right? The journalism just swallows her up as a sacrificial lamb, and then, for the story, always for the story. Except that, for the story, which apparently doesn't have that much effect. Is that the themes here? Like, what do you want?
Right. And then also because it's that trope of the student is now the teacher, and because the teacher's gone and dead in this case.
Right.
You're like, really? I don't know. That one didn't. That obviously that did not have a narrative or emotional payoff for me. But I think it's also confused with the actual climax, which is like they got to the president, and also this fascistic dictator is popped in the head and killed. And honestly, maybe that could be an interesting starting point for the movie. Maybe that's an opening scene.
Maybe so.
The ramifications of that being a piece of like potentially, if Pulitzer Prizes are still around, a bit of journalism on American Civil War. We have some notes. We'll mention those as we go through here. So Stephen McKinley Anderson, famous kind of character actor, has been around a long time in films. He's playing Sammy, like the veteran journalist. I think is he with the New York Times in this movie?
Yeah,
I feel like
whatever's left of the New York Times, quote unquote.
There's a couple hints at it as they're traveling, and it's like he kind of swaps some like, good old, journalism, war stories for the newbie, for this audience character that takes us through. All of these main four characters, I like all of the characters. It's a little tropey to have like such a specific cross section of character types there, but I think they all perform well enough, and it works. It works pretty well. And I'm kind of wrestling this idea of, there's that idea of like leave them wanting more, and I definitely want more from all four of these characters, but I feel like there's also there's a razor's edge there of like you still need to have enough in there to keep me wanting more, rather than just hinting at certain things.
So many hints. So many hints.
Yeah.
So many set pieces to show how crazy things are. How, we should talk about imagery, and we should talk about what Alex Garland thinks he's doing here. And then sort of what the problem with doing a movie like this might be,
Yeah, absolutely. So like character arcs and everything aside, and the problems and criticisms we mentioned so far, on a technical level, like there are just some spectacular set piece scenes that have a really interesting and I think pretty well executed meaning or point behind them. It's almost like the connective tissue to pull these different set pieces together is kind of what doesn't work for me, because there could be a touch more context given maybe as they're heading into a particular scene or they're coming out of a particular set piece would really kind of, I don't know, open this up. And they're journalists, like you're reporting it, you have an opinion, maybe, like, I don't know, I know people that not necessarily do war journalism, but like they talk shop, like, holy shit, can you believe what just happened? What was going on? Like, not like it'd be an exposition dump amongst journalists, but like there could be some reflection or discussion of what's going on here, right?
Well, there is some reflection, but it's always so fucking vague.
Yeah.
And, sometimes, I mean, you're showing a lot of things, but without at least some telling, the showing doesn't totally work, it appears.
There you go. That's it.
which is a hard irony, but it's true.
Right. Absolutely.
So, I mean, at a certain point, we should talk about, like, part of the problem here is that the politics aren't there. So, like, we're sort of indicating that you have this scenario and it's just not getting enough, attention, right? We're not getting enough detail to really latch on to what's happening.
Right.
We know in broad strokes, and supposedly that's enough, but it's not. It just doesn't gel, and then the journalism arc doesn't really work either, for the reasons that we mentioned.
Yeah. Let me play. I pulled a few clips of Alex Garland kind of talking about this, and since we can wrap up our kind of journalism angle conversation with this one, because he mentions kind of, I think, kind of why he chose journalists as his main characters, and let's hear the clip here. This is Alex Garland talking about the journalism side of this story.
One of the questions I asked myself a lot and thought about a lot, and where this came from, was I thought back to Watergate, Woodward, Bernstein, Washington Post, who brought down a corrupt president with reporting. And I wondered rhetorically, would that happen today? And I was thinking, no, it wouldn't. The press would not have the traction today that they had back then. And when you add that problem, because it is a problem, to populism, where does that lead?
That's an interesting idea.
Sure is.
Is that in the movie?
No, I mean, there's hints of it. I mean, part of it is like he talks about populism here, right? Which is not a great way to talk about where we are in a lot of ways. I mean, there's really populism gets thrown around by people in sort of the political center to describe both the right and left that is demanding things that would change the sort of current centrist neoliberal status quo. Well, it's not really functional, so let's not even call it the status quo.
Yeah.
And it's like, and there are ways of dealing with this, with the term populism at a more technical level, right? And it does seem like we're dealing with a populist president. But since we don't elaborate on his politics at all, other than probably very nationalistic, but we don't know, then it's really hard to tell what that means. So no, you're not playing with those themes. Yes, we get a sense that the journalists are not relevant in a certain way, but they're also acting like they are. Like they make comments like they aren't, but they're running to get the story, and the story is a big deal, right?
Yeah.
If nobody gave a shit, then they wouldn't be bothering, and other people wouldn't react to them the way they are.
I think that's a really good point, because they're also like at the beginning of the movie, you see them in like kind of a journalism hub at like a hotel or something, and there's clearly like a thriving like community of journalists there. I mean, I don't know. But what we're kind of missing is, I mean, and even in the trailer, it had it. There's like some like voiceover of like TV reports or some, journalism happening. But maybe I need something to show who these journalists are working for, and like what that, like an interaction, a phone call, a email message, a Zoom call, something where like they're interacting with the publications they're working for to get a broader kind of feeling of what the journalism landscape is that they're operating in.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. What is the journalism landscape they're operating? We get some sense of it. We know they work for Reuters.
Well, right. And then Sammy, like the grizzled like veteran journalist, like again mentioned as being with the New York Times. Is the New York Times like what the New York Times is now that there's like a civil war and a broken apart America? Or, is what's the standing? What's the, like if it's so important, like I just need I don't know. I just need a feel for like the journalism landscape here. And I think it would have helped.
I mean, they give a hint with the New York Times that it's not in good shape.
Right. But I mean, that's a kind of a modern position, as contemporary position as well.
To a certain degree, yeah.
To a degree, yeah. So
yeah, no, they don't really get into it. Well, part of it is they work for an international agency, so presumably the American media is a mess.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
So like that's sort of what that seems to indicate. I mean, it really seems more interested in showing the savagery of war. It's interested in showing the effects of mass killing and what that does to people, and the desire to kill and so forth, right? The sort of ways that society breaks down under this sort of pressure. But since we don't really know the politics of it, and let's be honest, part of what they're doing is they're punting the issue of race.
Yeah.
And in American Civil War, even if it's not directly, like it's not going to be like the first American Civil War or something.
Yeah, it's not fully Civil War 2.0 or anything, but
nonetheless, the idea that you can actually do this, it's pure cowardice. Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
He talks about right-wing populism in that clip. There's another clip as well, right?
Yeah, let me do there's one on like the Texas California alliance. That's
one thing I'm interested in is not so much where California and Texas are different, but where they're similar. In the film, to deliberately get in the way of a certain kind of easy reading of the film, in part, Texas and California have joined forces. They're joining forces against a fascist president, a president who has dismantled aspects of the Constitution, aspects of the legal system, is attacking journalists in a certain kind of way. And what they've said is our political differences are less important than this issue, which is fascism. that would then go back to what I was saying before. The interesting thing is, for me personally, is where I see fascism creeping in, where I see the fingerprints of it occurring, and then how much of a danger is it? One of the things I think about fascism is that a lot of people who are fascistic don't actually see themselves as fascists because they know it's a bad word and it's got a kind of stigma to it. But actually, in their behavior, there is something distinctly fascistic. And anyway, those are the dividing lines I'm interested in.
Here's about the thing about making good political film. Subtlety is overrated.
I'm kind of with you. Like, I think it needs to be a mix.
It can be a mix.
But I get your point, though. No, absolutely. Because, okay, perfect example here. What is one of the most striking scenes that people were really talking about in this movie?
It's the scene with Jesse Plemons.
Absolutely.
Where he and another soldier have a mass grave of people they've murdered, and they take the journalists and they murder two of them who are not from the United States. And there's some implication of racial politics, since at least one of our characters is not particularly white presenting and is from Florida. So they sort of accept that he's American. The two white Americans from the Midwest and the West are treated like, oh, well, you're American. And then the two guys of East Asian descent, who one of them says is from Hong Kong, oh, that's China, are murdered immediately. Oh, boy. Wow, I think we've got something going on here. Guess what? Nothing like that shows up anywhere else in the film.
I think one of the reasons why that scene works, there's a point of view expressed. Like, Jesse Plemons has a, obviously horrific, political ideology, but, he's a racist, like, ultra-nationalist militant, but, like, he believes in something.
He does. I mean, it's still not elaborate that much, and there's no context anywhere else for it.
Right. But I mean, like, if the main characters, like, had a stance, a belief, and like an ideology, something that they were articulating, that they were communicating, I think that would make it a better movie, rather than just being kind of like ciphers just traveling through this landscape.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Sometimes a little bit more context. I know you're thinking, but you think that you're elaborating off on journalism and their character and the imagery that you got to cover this absence, and this is what these clips seem to indicate, that you just don't, that Garland just doesn't realize what he doesn't have.
Or he's interested in the idea, but only in mentioning, not in like exploration of it. Or I don't know, maybe does he think he is exploring these ideas? And you were saying maybe it's being too subtle. Like you said, like the Plemons scene, I think, works because it isn't subtle. It's right there, it's in your face, and it's terrifying. And it's shot well. The sound mix was amazing. Like in the theater, you can hear like the rustle as people are like put on their knees. They're also, in the middle of, doing a mass grave when the journalists stumble upon them. So it's tense all around. It's very well executed. It's well paced. It's well edited. It's, impeccably shot. It's horrific. It's super tense.
Yeah.
But again, like you said, it's not subtle at all. But like doesn't need to be. Like you said, it's kind of overrated when you're putting together like ideally and expressly like political film.
Well, I just think about all the sort of gonzo like exploitation films I've seen.
Sure.
That deal sometimes with somewhat similar things. And you gotta just do it. You can't screw around like this so much.
I think you just cracked this movie open for me, actually, with that comparison. This should be an exploitation film.
Yeah.
On all kinds of levels. You're exploiting like the mood of America right now. You're exploiting the, volatile political situation right now. I know Alex Garland mentioned he wrote this pre January 6th, but once that happens, like, do another pass. Like, political violence means something different now that has happened. But yeah, if you're in exploitation territory, you're going to lean into like the hot button, quote unquote, issues. And I think you're going to have a much more interesting film.
Yeah. But part of it is also, though, it's very hinted that there's a Trumpian critique here. This is also trying to avoid taking sides.
Which that's essentially what we're saying then, right? That's why it's all watered down. There's no kind of point of view taken or staked out other than a few kind of side characters, Jesse Plemons being the best example of that.
I mean, I think you could make an argument that, yeah, at some level, yeah, kind of. I mean, I saw people make arguments that there is, and I think you can sort of. But once again, this is not the sort of thing where people should have to fight for it.
Yeah, it should be on screen.
It should be on screen.
And I think that shows the way that it is kind of like people are fighting for it or against it, and the way the discourse has gone. It's because it's hinted at, but not really there on screen. But the last clip I grabbed of Alex Garland, he's mentioning specifically kind of his perspective on how economics is politics.
Economics is politics. So do I think about it? Yes, I do. Where is the success of populism? It's partly in people who've been kept poor for generation after generation after generation, trickle down economics just not functioning, wealth essentially being hoarded, people feeling trapped and feeling that they need something to break the system because the system is breaking them. So that is economics, and it's also politics. Yeah. In terms of the film, honestly, I take a whole lot of money to make a film of someone. It's a transaction, right? I don't take it personally. The film takes it. I try and put all the money on the screen. And then I feel an obligation to pay it back, which is why I'm talking to you, because I'm trying to sell the film, right? I'm trying to sell it because the distributor's taken a risk, and I feel like it's my job in part to mitigate or limit that risk.
Is that why it's so watered down and kind of centristy? So you can get the most money possible if you're thinking about it in terms of like transactional, not artistic. I don't know. It's kind of convoluted, but
yeah, I mean, I guess, I mean, his read on sort of populism and economics is like standard boilerplate post-Trump stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people voting for Trump or whatever are those who are left behind, da 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 da. And it's like, well, maybe.
But also, again, that's an interesting scene or narrative arc or something to put in the movie.
And you have people where you could imagine that's the scenario, but it's never stated.
Right.
Which means, and it's never stated or directly explored. It's just hinted that it might be there.
Yeah.
Well, who cares? That's not exploring a theme. That's just indicating that it's there. That it could be there, but you're not actually doing it. What you end up with is this sort of social fabric tearing apart bit, which is done really well. You know, the horror of a war zone, the chaos, the confusion. But great. Why would you do this scenario to get that across? There's so many wars you could do that with.
I'm even fine with them exploring this as like an American Civil War. That's intriguing to me. I haven't seen that on film in this particular way before, so that's really fascinating. But I think the way to fix this movie, I guess from my perspective, is we need a multi-character narrative here. And I know we have like the 4 journalists, and that is a multi-character thing. But as we mentioned before, some of the set pieces are just stellar. The Jesse Plemons scene, maybe follow that, do it in like 6 or 7 chapters. And one of the chapters is we're following the Jesse Plemons character, like committing mass murder, doing a mass grave. Then the journalist story overlaps with him in that scene. You know, there's a scene where they're using like I don't know if it's a soccer or football stadium as almost like a kind of like refugee camp-ish scene. That's a great scene. It's an amazing visual. It's not really explored. Our characters just go off to one side and sit by themselves rather than interacting with like the human drama that's in front of them or covering it like journalists and taking some pictures, interacting with people. That could be an interesting chapter. Like, give me the aid workers that are, you know, putting together the help for this community at the stadium. That could be its own perspective. And then again, it could overlap with the journalist. If you open this up and have a multi-character kind of chapter story arc, maybe we have the president for one of those scenes. Like, we see what's going on there. Like, you could kind of open up and explore all of these things that he's kind of hinting at within the story that we have with a bit more depth and intrigue, I think.
Right. Well, part of it is, like you said, it sort of feels like a social media version of various sort of issues that we're dealing with right now. They're hinted at by, you know, they're presented, but they all end up feeling hollow because they're shorn of their content.
Yeah.
Right. They're shorn of the underlying content. So yeah, we know we have a right-wing populist president who's trying to hold on to power, but we don't really understand the content of his politics. He's probably xenophobic. He's probably something, but we don't know. Mm-hmm. We know he's attacked American citizens, but
he's attacked American citizens. He's in his 3rd term. Journalists are shot on site as they get close to him. Was like,
went after the FBI, you know, all this stuff. But like, it's not. I mean, So I think about another film dealing with the Civil War, which is Sleeping Dog, which is let's say a movie from New Zealand from 1977 starring Sam Neill, in a situation where you see very clearly the emergence of a fascist government backed by the United States and guerrillas, and then the formation of guerrilla groups fighting against it and so forth. It's very recognized. It's from 1977, and this actually goes back to the point of our original podcast, right? To a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
At a certain level, Children of Men gives us about as many hints as to what's going on politically.
Yeah.
At a certain level, I think it gives a lot more. But ultimately, it gives a lot more because it's done so much more artfully and clearly getting across things, which a lot of liberals didn't get. So they don't necessarily get who the characters in Children of Men are in social context of, let's say, the early 2000s when the movie came out.
Right.
Nonetheless, it's actually there. This movie, it's not, because there isn't the political sophistication to know who these people would be.
Right. Well, even it goes back to that clip we played too, where he's talking about Texas and California, where like that could be interesting to explore, like how they came together. But he was like, no, I put them together to avoid like a direct reading. It's like, well, why are you obscuring a point you want to make?
Why are you obscuring your direct reading?
Like you said, subtlety,
or overrated.
Being overrated.
So, the reason I brought in Sleeping Dog is not because I think it's a fantastic movie. It's like good. But because it does lay out its political stakes in the time period that it's in a way that really connects. The reason you bring in Children of Men is that in some ways it does a lot of similar context clues based on current politics of when it came out. But like does it so much more artfully, and of course so much more of the scenario is explained. That's the thing. Like a lot more of it is explained. This, because it's not afraid of its politics. This in many ways feels like it is, to the point at which you don't really understand it, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, so I had a kind of a film comparison I wanted to bring up as well. Surprise, surprise, it's a documentary. There's a documentary from 2001 called War Photographer that's about James, I forgot how you pronounce his name, Natchway, regarded as like one of the great war photographers, period. Within that documentary, though, he has a, I don't know if it's a direct quote or not, but it was from my notes when I watched it years ago, that documenting war is a small but essential step towards its eventual eradication.
Right.
That's someone who's doing the job that's portrayed in this movie, who has a point of view on why they're doing that particular job, especially a high risk, you may get killed at any moment job. You have to want to be doing that. That's not just clock in and do your job and go home kind of stuff here.
Right.
And maybe I need a nod towards that. No, I need more than just a nod towards that. I need some like actual exploration of why are we, I mean, other than like, we got to get the story. I get that. But like, why are you heading basically to certain death as you will be executed as a journalist when you arrive in like,
because you're adrenaline junkies. That seems to be the conclusion here.
That's fine. And it's not war photography or war journalism, but like that's explored in much with such craft in like The Hurt Locker or something, where like it's not necessarily said out loud by the characters, but like it's in the narrative. It's baked into it.
Because it's a cynical business, but we could also watch Nightcrawler for that.
Right. Or stick with Catherine Bigelow, Point Break. Clearly adrenaline junkies there.
But part of it is, then why would you put it in the scenario of an American Civil War with all of these deeply politically laden things,
right,
that you're not going to explore?
Right. Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I do want to mention though too, like I said, there are set pieces here that are fantastic. The last 15 minutes, the raid on the White House, expertly choreographed action sequence with a horrible narrative payoff of, the Kirsten Dunst character being killed and all that. But the way that it's all put together is just spectacular. Like it's a riveting thriller climax. There's a scene, I think more towards the middle, where they're driving through an outdoor like Christmas setup, like scene decoration wise. And then the four journalists come across two snipers who are shooting at somebody in a house. It's also an amazing little scene, and it tells you a lot about the context of war. It tells you a lot about the mentality of sometimes like smaller moments within a larger war where the sniper is shooting at somebody in a house, so they have no idea who it is, but they're shooting at them because they're shooting at the snipers.
I mean, it's it's a less in some ways. I mean, I know, yeah, the scene you're talking about, I liked it, and I think it does get that across. I mean, it's in some ways, it reminds me. I just watched The Red and the White, which is a Hungarian movie from the '60s about the Russian Civil War in the teens, and Hungarians fighting for the Bolsheviks, and which is very much about the sort of chaos and aimlessness of war and the waste, and it sort of gets that across, but it's not nearly at that level. And that's also a movie that sort of skews the politics, but for a reason to get across something in the context in which the politics exists. So I guess, yeah, I think, that particular sequence is a really well done way of making that type of point. It just like, which has been made in other films, but that's fine.
Right.
It's just
going into the scene, come out of the scene, and its role and the great, like, what? Okay, interesting scene. What are you doing with it? Oh, nothing really, I guess.
I mean, society collapsing at the edges, tit for tat, chaos. Nobody knows why they're shooting at each other.
Sure.
Great stuff. Themes that like I am usually deeply, deeply on board on.
I do like the movie. It's not a great movie. I like it because I like it the way I like other flawed movies that aren't great, but like it's interesting to watch because there's enough set pieces that I enjoy in the movie. There's some arresting visual imagery. There are some great performances, but it's just like, man, I wish this was better. And it's so close. Like, it just, one more draft, maybe a different writer needs to step in, or like, I don't know.
So I think I basically agree with you. And I think it's an interesting thing that it fails in the way that it does, because it speaks, I think maybe its failures speak to the weaknesses of the politics of our moment, where we are in a deep crisis, but we've been through sort of 40 years of bleach cleaning away ideologies other than sort of like bland liberalism and the far right. And, sort of the left exists in this movie, which is really not shown at all, but is hinted at, right?
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but we were saying, like, as a rewrite, like, do chapters, do different perspectives. Give me one of the chapters with the Portland Maoists, and let's see the Antifa massacre that's mentioned.
Right, yeah, what is this?
Yeah.
It's hinted at, which tells you something about, well, one, the left is back in consciousness. If you're going to write about this, they're going to show up. That's really interesting. But because the director, you see, part of it is that when you watch political movies, let's say the 60s, and that's a lot of times what I think of it as, which we've covered a lot of times, even if the director is no longer involved, you feel like they're politically engaged. So they understand what they're looking at. This is the thing about when you bring up Children of Men, is that the director seems to know, or the writer, they seem to know what they're talking about with these people. You have a real feel for it. This, you avoid even dealing with, really, I mean, other than Jesse Plemons, right-wing nationalists, and of course, it's hard to figure out what his line is. It's real American, it's clearly racially based, but he still won't say anything racist enough. And an American racist is going to say it.
Yeah.
Nationality is brought up, race is implied. Too chicken shit to even just make him a proper white nationalist in a context in which he has a mass grave, but he's not, he's killed all sorts of people because part of it is the breakdown in this war is who knows? We don't know why he is a mass grave.
Right.
Who's he killing? It's people from the other side. It's refugees. People who he thinks aren't American.
People from the town who were like, we don't want the military occupying our like we're left to speculate, which can be fine in a certain context. But here you're like, give me some more, like you said, it's too subtle. And that was actually one of the least subtle scenes of the movie.
Give me something. And it's the scene that everybody sort of excuses this movie with. I like it for its failings because I think it says something about where we are, and actually the failure of film as a medium because of where the film industry is and who's making them, to actually do the thing.
Yeah.
There are 80s exploitation movies about a crime taking over New York and it turning into a wasteland that have more political acuity than this.
Well, I think that's a good transition to what we'll be watching and discussing next, Isaac. But before we do that, I think I know the answer to this one. We always ask at the end of the show, is this a leftist film?
No, but it's not. You should watch it. Also, watch it on a big screen because, yeah, honestly, this is some of the best put together action sequences I've seen outside of a George Miller movie in a recent American film. Okay, I can think of a bunch, but it's really well done. It's some of the most visceral war footage I've seen in a movie in a very long time.
And shout out sound design because like it's some of the like that sniper sequence. You would hear it like echoing around. Oh, it was spectacular. So
this is frustrating because this movie has so many things going for it.
yeah, it does. I think if watching it with leftists or a group of friends together, like it'll get you talking and probably enraged because it like as we've been complaining for however long we've been complaining about now, it'll get a discussion going, and it's a visceral thriller as well. That said, we're going to dip our toes and see if some other films, maybe from an earlier time period in American film history, actually do it. Do they go for it, Isaac? What have we got on deck for next time?
Do they go for it? Do they actually do the politics? Do they dare make a statement? Do they dare to not make a statement? By not making a statement, are we making a statement? Oh, God. Next, we are exploring the 70s paranoid thriller. Post-Watergate. What does anything even mean? The man is out to get you. So, but, are these films political? It's a good question. We're going to look at one of the most famous films of this genre and one of the not as famous films of this genre and compare them. We're going to be looking at Parallax View from, what year was that?
74.
Oh, 74. Early in the cycle. And then an early Chuck Norris vehicle called Good Guys Wear Black from 1978. And you may be wondering, how can we compare these two films? Trust me, there's a reason. It's all going to come together.
Longtime listeners of the show will know there's a thing I'll often reference as the patented Isaac out of left field double feature.
Yep.
And this has all the hallmarks of that. But also it's well, I would also say too, it's our second time we've covered a Chuck Norris movie on the show, all the way back with another double feature idea you had, which was Wolf Warrior 2 and Invasion USA episode on that one. But there is this idea we've been kind of batting around in our show prep. I don't think we've really said it on the show, but you just mentioned the whole idea of there's 70s political thrillers, which we'll get into with these two, that are kind of known as like, oh my God, like the heyday of political thrillers back then. But we were kind of wondering, are they
political?
Yeah. So
everything political, that's the idea of the podcast, but are they overtly political? Or what are they actually, or are they just about vibes?
I'm interested, I know we're wrapping up and we'll get into this more, but one of the things I'm interested in looking at, especially with the Parallax View, is it's the idea of this, it's a multi-million-dollar corporation that really, it's like the network premise from the movie Network of, there's this international multi-million-dollar corporation, which is actually running the show. So the conspiracy vibes of the 70s and how that has evolved and changed possibly in the way that conspiracies are just part of mainstream politics now, which is fascinating and terrifying all at the same time here in the United States. Before we officially sign off here, be sure to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are using. And if you enjoy the show, tell a friend or two or three. And if you love the show and feel so inclined and have the means, we have a Patreon page set up as well. See all the links in the show notes for all of that vital information. And until next time, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Isaac. Free Palestine. Keep fighting. Fight authoritarianism, whether it be spouted, come forth from, the liberal center trying to crush protests, or the hard right attempting to create an authoritarian state. Wow. Sounds like the movies we're talking about actually are daily lives. Stay safe out there.